The weeks that followed felt like a slow awakening for Rachel. She discovered that life could surprise her even after years of routine. Even after the quiet loneliness that had settled in her marriage, every small step she took to engage, to be present, or to spark a conversation with Mark brought subtle but powerful shifts. One evening, Mark suggested they take a weekend trip to a nearby lake town. It wasn't far, just enough to leave their city routines behind, to breathe, and to see each other without distractions. Rachel felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. She packed lightly, bringing her favorite scarves, a few casual outfits, and a notebook where she sometimes jotted down thoughts about her life. The drive was calm, punctuated by soft music and small talk. For the first time in a long time, Rachel felt like she was traveling with her partner, not just alongside someone who happened to share her home. She noticed the small gestures: Mark offering her a warm coffee, holding the door, laughing at a story she shared from work. These weren't grand declarations. They were ordinary acts filled with the comfort of attention. Upon arrival, the town seemed quiet, almost sleepy, but warm. Streets lined with small shops, cafes with open windows, and children playing near the fountain created an atmosphere that felt almost magical. Rachel and Mark wandered window shopping, stopping occasionally for a coffee or a pastry. Each moment felt unhurried, intentional, and alive. In the evening, they rented a small cabin by the lake. Rachel unpacked their things while Mark prepared a simple meal. She glanced around the room, modest, cozy, with a view of water reflecting the soft orange of sunset, and felt a warmth she hadn't realized she was missing. After dinner, Mark suggested they sit on the porch and watch the stars. Rachel nodded, pulling a blanket around her shoulders as they leaned back on the wooden chairs. The sky was vast, dotted with twinkling lights, and the silence was gentle, not awkward. "Remember the lake we visited on our first anniversary?" Mark asked quietly. Rachel smiled. "How could I forget? You insisted on canoeing even though I was terrified of water." Mark chuckled. "And you loved it eventually. That's the memory I've always carried." Rachel's heart softened. That was the version of their love she remembered: adventurous, tender, full of trust and playful challenges. "I missed this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I missed us like this." Mark reached over, brushing her hand lightly. "I missed it too. I didn't realize how much I'd taken us for granted." That night, Rachel couldn't sleep immediately. She lay awake, listening to the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. The silence gave her space to reflect on the changes she had begun. The reunion with Mark's friends, her choice to step forward, to be present, had sparked something inside her. She realized she had been waiting for someone else to notice her when she could take the first step herself. The next day, Rachel woke early to watch the sunrise. Mark was still asleep, and she slipped outside with her notebook. She sat on a bench facing the lake, writing freely. Thoughts poured out, memories of her past, her regrets, her hopes for the future, and a newfound gratitude for small moments. Writing reminded her that life was not about grand gestures, but about noticing the little things, the subtle beauty in ordinary days. When Mark joined her, coffee in hand, they sat together, silently appreciating the morning. She realized something essential. Intimacy wasn't only physical or dramatic. It was emotional, mental, and spiritual, a quiet sharing of presence, attention, and care. Later, as they explored the town, Rachel noticed the way Mark's eyes lingered on her occasionally, a soft smile curling at the corners of his lips. She felt the same toward him, not desire in the physical sense, but admiration and warmth, a connection that went deeper than routine. They laughed more freely, teased each other gently, and for the first time in years felt like partners in life again. That evening, they prepared a small dinner together in the cabin. Rachel chopped vegetables while Mark set the table. She realized that these simple acts, cooking together, sharing tasks, exchanging small smiles, created a rhythm, a harmony that reminded her why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace. The warm glow illuminated their faces, and the crackling fire added a comforting soundtrack. Rachel reflected on how much had shifted in her life since the reunion dinner. The attention she had felt from Mark's friends had awakened something inside her, a courage to be present, to engage, to speak, and to feel again. Mark broke the silence softly. I want us to do more of this, not just weekends, but in our daily lives. I don't want to lose this feeling again. Rachel nodded. I want that too. I realized I need to show up, not just hope you notice me. And I want us to notice each other. It was a simple conversation, yet it carried immense weight. It signaled the start of a new chapter, one in which Rachel and Mark consciously participated in their marriage. They shared memories, hopes, and laughter, building layers of connection that had faded over time. On the final day of the trip, they walked along the lake one last time before leaving. Rachel felt a calm confidence she hadn't known in years. She understood that life would still have routine, still have work pressures, and still have moments of silence or distance. But now she knew how to reclaim presence and connection with herself, with Mark, and with life itself. As they drove home, Rachel glanced at her husband. The spark in his eyes mirrored her own, a subtle but undeniable reconnection. She smiled inwardly, feeling gratitude for the events that had led them here. The reunion dinner, the laughter, the reflection, the choices to step forward. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it was lasting. Back home, Rachel felt the house differently. She noticed small details, the warmth of the living room, the way sunlight fell through the curtains, even the smell of Mark's cologne lingering softly on the chair. Life felt fuller, richer, more alive. She realized that true intimacy and connection weren't about excitement or indulgence. They were about attentiveness, shared presence, and emotional engagement. That night, lying beside Mark, Rachel felt a wave of contentment. She reached for his hand and he held it back without a word, a simple gesture, yet powerful. She whispered softly, "Thank you for noticing me." Again, Mark squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for showing up." And in that moment, Rachel understood the most important lesson of all. Love, attention, and emotional connection are choices we make every day. They aren't passive. They aren't guaranteed. But when both partners show up, when both are present, even ordinary life becomes extraordinary. The days that followed carried the same quiet joy. Rachel and Mark spent evenings cooking together, shared walks, laughter over stories, and small adventures. The spark that had seemed lost for years had returned not as a flash of excitement, but as a steady flame of connection, understanding. And Rachel realized she didn't need validation from anyone else. She had discovered her own strength, her own presence, and the power of engaging fully with life and love. She felt alive, noticed, and deeply connected to the man she had chosen to spend her life with. And as she looked at Mark, she silently promised herself no more fading into the background, no more waiting for someone else to see her. She would live, love, and be present fully and unapologetically every single day. It was a quiet victory, lasting awakening, and a love reborn in ways that neither had anticipated. Rachel Cooper was known in her small Chicago neighborhood as the calm, graceful wife who always smiled at everyone, even when she felt exhausted inside. At 42, she had a good life, a stable marriage, a warm home, and a husband who provided for her. But what people didn't know was that she had been feeling like a quiet shadow in her own house for years. Her husband was a successful architect. He wasn't unkind, just emotionally distant. He loved his work more than anything. Rachel used to be his closest friend, the woman who made him laugh after long days. But time and routine had changed them. He became serious, absorbed in deadlines and meetings. Their conversations grew shorter, their laughter quieter, and their connection thinner. So when Mark told her that his college friends were coming over for a reunion dinner, Rachel wasn't excited, but she wasn't against it either. She just wanted to see her husband happy again. The day of the gathering was cold and gray. One of those evenings when the sky looked heavy with rain. Rachel spent all morning preparing. She cooked her best dishes, cleaned every corner of the house, and even wore her favorite blue dress, the one Mark used to compliment years ago. She didn't know why she cared so much, but deep down, she hoped he might notice her the way he used to. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Laughter and loud voices filled the air as Mark's friends entered one by one. Ethan, Jason, and Tom, they were energetic, full of stories, and still carried that spark of youthful excitement that adulthood rarely allows. Rachel smiled politely, greeting each of them, offering drinks, and trying to blend into the rhythm of the evening. The men settled in the living room, reminiscing about college days, dorm rooms, road trips, and bad decisions that somehow made for great stories now. Rachel stayed nearby, refilling glasses, listening from the side. She laughed softly at their jokes, though no one really looked at her directly. For a moment, she caught sight of Mark. His eyes were alive, smile brighter than she'd seen in months. He was the center of the group, relaxed, funny, confident. And in that instant, Rachel felt something unfamiliar. She missed this version of her husband, the one she hadn't seen in years. Later, while she was setting more snacks on the table, she overheard Ethan teasing Mark. "Man, Rachel's got patience. You still working late every night?" Mark chuckled. "You know me. I'm always married to my job." Everyone laughed. Rachel forced a smile, but inside, those words hit her harder than she expected. Married to his job. That's what she had become. Not a partner, not a friend. Just someone who existed quietly beside his work. Dinner began, and the room grew louder. The conversation shifted from work to memories. Then to an old box of VHS tapes. One of them had brought old college footage they hadn't seen in years. Jason pulled out a small projector, and soon, the living room wall became a screen of laughter and nostalgia. The men leaned forward eagerly, watching themselves from decades ago dancing at parties, singing badly in bars, laughing over silly pranks. The room filled with joy, but Rachel stood a little apart, watching them watch their younger selves. Something about it struck her deeply. They were reliving their past, the time when everything was fresh and full of promise. She realized how different she felt now, how far she'd drifted from the version of herself who once believed in new beginnings. Ethan turned toward her and said kindly, "Rachel, you should have seen Mark back then. He was the wild one." She smiled. "I can imagine." But the truth was, she couldn't. She couldn't imagine this man she now lived with being that carefree, passionate person. And for the first time, she wished she could see him the way they saw him, laughing, alive, and unguarded. As the film played on, she sat on the couch beside him, quiet but restless. Every so often, she'd glance at his face, the way his eyes softened as he watched the screen, the way his hand brushed against hers without thought. The warmth of that small contact made her heart ache. When the laughter faded, the movie ended, Jason joked, "We should record a new video, a before and after of life." Everyone laughed, including Rachel. But deep inside, she thought, "I wouldn't want to see my after right now." The night continued with more drinks, music, and stories. Rachel joined the conversation more than usual, telling small stories of her own, about her work, about her garden, about their travels. To her surprise, Mark's friends actually listened. They complimented her kindness, her humor, and one of them said, "Mark, you're lucky." For a second, Rachel felt seen not as Mark's wife, but as herself. When the night ended and everyone said their goodbyes, Rachel stood at the doorway, waving them off into the cold night air. Mark was laughing as he hugged Ethan goodbye. The streetlights reflected on his face, and she realized how happy he'd been, how different he seemed when surrounded by people who reminded him of who he used to be. When the door finally closed, silence filled the house. Rachel turned to look at the empty living room, now quiet except for the ticking clock. There were half-empty glasses on the table, crumbs on the counter, and laughter still echoing faintly in her mind. Mark began gathering plates, and she said softly, "You looked happy tonight." He glanced up. It was good to see them. "Been too long." She hesitated. "I liked seeing you that way. Relaxed." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, it felt good." That was all he said before heading to the kitchen. And just like that, the moment passed. Rachel stood there alone for a while. her eyes lingering on the blank wall where the old videos had been projected. She imagined what it would look like if her life played on that screen, if someone were watching her story unfold. Would it even hold anyone's attention? Would there be laughter, excitement, or passion? The thought made her sigh. She didn't envy Mark's friends or their memories. She envied the way they could feel so much just by watching them. She wanted to feel that again, alive, seen, connected. That night, she lay beside her husband, listening to his steady breathing. She whispered to herself they all wanted to watch their past. And I wish I had something worth watching now. It wasn't jealousy or regret. It was longing. A longing for meaning, for spark, for the kind of attention that says, "You matter," and though she didn't know it yet. That quiet thought would be the beginning of everything that followed, a slow, emotional awakening that would challenge her heart and change her marriage forever. The week after the reunion, Rachel couldn't shake the memories of that evening. The laughter, the playful teasing, the way Mark's friends looked at him, or even at her sometimes, lingered in her mind like a soft echo. It wasn't about jealousy. It was about connection. She realized she had spent years existing alongside her husband, but rarely with him in a way that made her feel alive. Every day, she found herself replaying small moments, Ethan's curious questions, Jason's easy humor, and even Tom's quiet observations. She hadn't noticed before, but each of them, in their way, had treated her as a person worth listening to, worth noticing. And it struck her in all the years she had been married. She hadn't really felt that from Mark. Not lately. On a Wednesday afternoon, Rachel decided to take a walk to clear her head. The streets were lined with autumn leaves, crisp and golden, and the sunlight reflected off the buildings in soft bursts. As she strolled, she passed the cafe where she and Mark used to go before life became routine. The memories tugged at her casual coffee dates, small shared smiles, conversations that stretched for hours. Where had those moments gone? Later that day, Mark returned home from work, exhausted as usual. He barely noticed the tension in Rachel's eyes. She wanted to ask him questions, to open up, to tell him she missed feeling like they were partners, friends, and lovers all at once. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she busied herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The next weekend, Mark invited Ethan over to help him with a home project. Rachel found herself suddenly excited, not just to see Mark happy, but to be involved. She decided to stay nearby while they worked in the garage, pretending to organize tools but secretly enjoying their presence. Ethan smiled at her. "I didn't know you liked this stuff," he said casually, lifting a hammer. Rachel laughed lightly. "I don't, but I like being here. It's different." Different. That word captured everything. With Ethan around, she felt seen. Not as Mark's wife, not as someone expected to stay in the background, but as herself. Mark watched silently as Rachel interacted with his friend. He noticed the spark in her eyes, the subtle lift of her shoulders, the way her laughter rang freely. It made him pause. For the first time in months, he wondered how much of Rachel he had stopped noticing. That evening, after Ethan left, Rachel sat on the porch swing, sipping tea, letting the cool breeze brush against her face. Mark joined her, his hand brushing hers, tentative but deliberate. "You seem different today," he said quietly. Rachel hesitated, then spoke softly. "I guess I wanted to be part of things, not just watch from the sidelines." Mark nodded slowly, understanding. "I didn't realize I'd stopped including you. I thought you liked staying in the background." Rachel shook her head. "I didn't know how to ask to be seen." For a long moment they sat in silence. It wasn't awkward. It was a rare kind of comfort. She realized that their marriage hadn't lacked love, but attention. Careful, thoughtful attention. And for the first time in years, she felt the possibility of reconnecting with her husband in a deep, meaningful way. The following days were different. Rachel made subtle changes in her routine. She joined Mark in small projects around the house, offered opinions on his work, and even invited him to small outings she enjoyed. He responded, gradually, with more conversation, more attention. and more shared laughter. One afternoon, she asked Mark to go through some old photo albums she had kept from their early years. As they flipped the pages, they laughed at awkward hairstyles, old vacations, and forgotten friends. Rachel realized that looking at these memories together made her feel closer to him. She was rediscovering the joy they had once shared. And Mark seemed to notice it too. Meanwhile, she noticed her own transformation. She began to speak more openly, laugh more freely, and let herself feel again. The yearning she had felt after the reunion dinner, that quiet longing to be noticed, was slowly replaced by action. She was claiming her presence in their shared life. One evening, after dinner, Mark suggested they watch the old videos Ethan had brought over the week before. Rachel agreed, curious to see them again. As the projector flickered to life, she noticed the same emotions surfacing: nostalgia, warmth, and a quiet ache. But this time, she also noticed herself, watching the young versions of her husband and his friends. She realized something important. She hadn't lost her spark. She had simply stopped giving herself permission to be part of life's moments. And now, by engaging with Mark and even his friends, she was stepping back into it fully and intentionally. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Mark turned to her and said softly, "I didn't realize how much I had stopped seeing you." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. "And I didn't realize how much I had stopped letting you." It wasn't a dramatic confession, but it was a start. A tiny step toward rebuilding the connection they had both missed. It was emotional, yes, but also deeply human, the kind of moment that could change the course of a relationship without fanfare or exaggeration. Rachel went to sleep that night with a quiet sense of hope. She understood that rekindling intimacy wasn't about grand gestures. It was about being seen, being present, and taking small steps to participate fully in life with Mark, with friends, and, most importantly, with herself. She had learned a subtle but powerful truth. Attention and presence mattered more than perfection. Laughter mattered more than silence, and emotional connection mattered more than appearances. And in the quiet, she whispered to herself almost as a promise, "I won't hide anymore. I will let myself be seen. I will reclaim my life, piece by piece." This realization set the stage for the changes that were yet to come, for the reconnection. The laughter and the small adventures that would slowly bring her and Mark closer than they had been in years.